Aotearoa.
Dzień dobry.
Second shot now, 80-80, and it's missed. It's tipped and loose ball falling down. Everyone's diving. Lithuania have it.
It was all square going into the final minute.
Non, rien de rien.
Yankee Doodle came to town a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Kareiviai vorą paskui vorą, ginti brangią žemę, šalį Lietuvos alytę pulkas paukšte.
He was a man of terrifying barbarity, a genius at political treachery.
Respublica Serenissima, the most serene republic, was an extraordinary state by any standards in European history. It functioned from 1572 until 1793-95, 223 years. It consisted of two parts: the Korona, or the Crown Lands of Poland, and secondly, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania.
Big Dog's Tale. The Big Dog's Tale. As you know, I was brought up in France. As a child, I lived in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, on Rue de la Cille Popincourt. The nearest metro station was Saint-Ambroise, or, if you left the house on the other side, Richard Lenoir. I found out my father was a baboon when I was only a few years old. As she poured another glass of Beaujolais, my mother told me I had inherited all my character traits from him, and I'd be an orderly in a mental asylum, or even worse, a pimp. I didn't understand a word of what my mother said. I didn't understand a word of what my mother used to say. I think she loved me, and it was more of a warning against the fate that could be lying in wait for me around the corner. I don't recall much of my childhood, except that now and then, yet another man would appear and shut himself in the bedroom of our two-room flat with my mother for hours on end. Each time I asked her if this man was the baboon, in other words, my father, but she refused to give me an answer, and one time she scolded me for asking that rankling question in the presence of a man called Manolo. Manolo laughed at what I'd said and gave me a friendly stroke on the head. He and I looked like a monkey too, so I must be the son of this Monsieur Babouin, as he put it. As soon as he said it, I began to imitate a monkey, which he found highly amusing. I clung to his legs and wound around his chair, trying to imagine I was a baboon. Our visitors included men of a wide variety of nationalities. Once I was going to school, I started seeking out the places they came from on the globe. This way, I determined the locations of Buenos Aires, Kinshasa, Bucharest, Iceland, Peru, Tunis, the Cape Verde Islands, Hamburg, Auckland, Santiago de Chile, Kansas City, Veracruz, Winnipeg, Bilbao, Manila, Magnitogorsk, Bolivia, and lots of other places I would never have known existed. It was a rare event for someone to come from the same country. The exception to this rule were the Japanese. They were the most welcome guests of all. Not one of them spoke French, but my mother was able to deal with them. Not all of them were from Tokyo. I discovered such places on the map as Kyoto, Osaka, Hakodate, Kobe, Nagoya, Akita, Sapporo, Iwaki, Nagasaki, and Sendai. You could say I knew quite a lot about Japan and the people who live there. All these slant-eyed guests were very polite, and sometimes they bowed with their hands together as if they were going to pray. Because of this, I regarded them as very religious, and I wanted to follow their example. One of the Japanese, whose name was Yoshiho, I know because he left his business card, brought a bottle of whiskey. I recognized the name because of a Scottish sailor my mother called Rob Roy, who once had visited us and brought her a half-drunk bottle of the stuff, and also a flask with a label on it showing a skull. I liked the skull very much, and afterwards I often used to wonder if it wasn't some sort of extract of corpse, because whenever our guest used to drink it and then shut himself in the bedroom with my mother, cries of "Hi, hi, hi" would start coming out of there, not very loud at first, but then buffaloing into the squeal of a scalded cat. This "hi, hi, hi, hi" noise went echoing round the entire house, and I was surprised the concierge didn't come knocking at our door to advise our guest, who must have been affected by the diabolical extract, that it was late and people were trying to sleep. He went on emitting these shrieks until morning, when an ambulance had to be called for my mother. In fact, she called it herself. She was pale and exhausted as she dialed the emergency number. Meanwhile, the Japanese, who also looked tired, said goodbye, handing me a bundle of something that looked like money. It wasn't the sort of money my mother used, but she looked very pleased with it, and when the firemen came at last, they found it was just a dizzy spell caused by overworking. Another of my mother's guests was Monsieur Zagokskin. I didn't like him at first, but as he always brought me toys, I came to accept him. Monsieur Zagoskin taught my mother to drink a liquid that put her in a state of incredible euphoria. One evening, when Monsieur Zagoskin was conferring with my mother in the other room, there was an incident that gave me a lot to think about, and I must admit, a pretty big fright too. I should add that it wasn't just any old evening, because Monsieur Zagoskin had given me more toys than usual, and there was a festive atmosphere that day in honor of my mother's birthday. That day, Monsieur Zagoskin brought 4 bottles of the elixir which, apart from the one she crammed into the icebox full of food, my mother put behind my divan bed. As well as the food my mother had prepared, a jar of herrings was put on the table. Monsieur Zagoskin adroitly dished up the herring on little plates, guests buffaloing to instruct us to cut them into smaller pieces. I got my herring and tried it, but I must have had a miserable look on my face because Monsieur Zagoskin and my mother started laughing at me. Eventually, I gave up on the herring and came out of it well, because later I discovered they cause a thirst that only can be quenched by the odorless drink Monsieur Zagoskin had brought my mother. After the second bottle, my mother started stroking Monsieur Zagoskin's head and giving him coquettish looks. I was overcome by the idea that I was a baboon. I crawled under the table. Then I noticed Monsieur Zagoskin's hand between my mother's legs, which she was parting in a weird way. As I was wondering what to do in this situation, my mother and Monsieur Zagoskin got up from the table and moved into the bedroom, where, whenever we had a guest, I was forbidden to enter. Sometimes there were noises from in there whose source I couldn't understand. Sometimes my mother began howling too. I used the word howling, and in this case it's justified, because it was something like the howling of the wolf I'd seen in a beautiful movie at the Pompidou Center. My mother howled loudest when the monsieur from the Cape Verde Islands called on us. It was always as if he'd changed himself and my mother into a couple of werewolves that went running up the walls. And there must have been some truth in that, because later on I saw for myself how the plaster was flaking off the wall the bed was against. My mother howled this time too. First quite steadily, then it all went quiet, but it was the lull before the storm, if not the tempest. The whole house began to shake. To steel myself, I drank up what was left of my mother's glass, and my spirits rose. Meanwhile, a hurricane was thundering through the house. The window panes were rattling, and the crystal vase Monsieur Zagoskin had given my mother as a birthday present fell off the sideboard. That evening my mother howled, occasionally punctuating it with the word doucement, so it went like this, doucement, doucement, all mixed up with her howling. As I had nothing to do, I decided to empty Monsieur Zagoskin's glass. Luckily, the third bottle was standing on the table. There was no time to suffer for long because suddenly the door opened and there stood Monsieur Zagoskin. He glanced at me, but it was the stare of a blind man. I don't think he could actually see anyone in the room. Anyone, which doesn't mean anything. At a determined pace, he came up to the table where there were some cigarettes. He lit one, dragging on it eagerly. Next, to my astonishment, he drank straight from the bottle and then emptied the water from a flower vase onto the table and poured the rest of the bottle into it. Meanwhile, there was something strange going on behind the door. I heard my mother accusing Monsieur Zagoskin of some vile behavior, then something like a pistol shot. The shot rang out again. I tried to go to sleep, but my mother kept shouting something that sounded very improper. Then it all went quiet, but just as I was dozing off, there it was again. Doucement, doucement. I couldn't get any peace. I imagined Monsieur Zagoskin getting a job at our house and using his hose pipe to water the lawn in the courtyard instead of the concierge. I was awoken by some noises. Suddenly the door to the other room was thrown open, and there in a shaft of electric light stood my mother. Her hair was like the neighbor's hair the time she chased down the street by her husband, as I later learned, holding a meat cleaver, just like the one my mother used to make chops. She also said I was never to accept candy from the woman next door or any other sweets because she was a whore who went to bed with a different guy every night. So the door flew open, and there stood my mother in the exact same hair as the neighbor I remembered being chased by her husband. I don't know if she could see in the dark, but I heard the word merde twice and no other words, which was a sign that everything was all right, and it was to do with the bottle behind the divan bed where I was sleeping. I heard my mother's voice sounding like glue. There were 2 bottles of vodka behind the divan bed, she said. I sat up and checked in the dark, but yes, as I thought, there was only one there now. Mother, there's only one, I said. It was Mother's Day, and at school we were told to give a talk on the topic, There's Only One Mother. So I described everything I remembered to do with Monsieur Zagoskin and the bottle my mother came looking for that night. That story made everyone laugh, especially Monsieur Zagoskin, when I told it at home. One day my mother announced that for our holidays we were going to Monsieur Zagoskin's homeland, but to do that we'd need visas because it was a country where there was real communism and not everyone could go there just like that. I didn't understand what communism meant, but a classmate explained it meant justice and progress, while in France people were putrefying under the scourge of capitalism. Meanwhile, my mother explained to me that Monsieur Zagoskin had an important job at his country's embassy, and we were going there to get the visas we needed. It was raining when we went to the embassy. Monsieur Zagoskin was waiting for us at the main entrance. There were several gendarmes waiting outside the building. I glanced at them in case they were showing signs of putrefaction, but they looked healthy, as near healthy as Monsieur Zagoskin's friends, who gave us a warm welcome. They all kissed my mother, and one of them put a bottle of the stuff Monsieur Zagoskin usually brought for her on the table. Someone else fetched some glasses out of a cupboard, and my mother was asked for the passports, hers and mine. One of them, speaking in a language similar to our Portuguese concierge, said everything would be ready in a quarter of an hour because the applications we had sent a month earlier had been approved. Monsieur Zagoskin seemed to be in control of the situation. The glasses were filled, including one for my mother too, who knocked it back the same way as all the others. This won her applause, and the glasses were filled again. They drank another round, and straight after that a third, so there wasn't much left in the bottle. This was soon remedied as a new bottle appeared on the table. Monsieur Zagoskin began telling the story of my school speech on the story, There is Only One Mother. I didn't understand that at first, but as he asked my mother about a few essential phrases that he then used to enrich his language, I guessed what was going on. Everyone sitting at the table whooped with laughter. This is from Feast of Fools.
Crazy Horse and Korchak. We all know who Crazy Horse was, the Sioux chief who wiped out General Custer and 264 men of the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of the Little Bighorn 101 years ago. But who is Korchak? Well, he's a sculptor who accepted a commission to carve a statue of Crazy Horse.
Tell me, mister, how can I ask you to believe that I can carve that mountain if I don't believe in myself first? Of course I'm egotistical. I believe I can do it. I know I can do it.
The mountain will be identical to the model, except that it will be 34 times bigger, about 600 feet high. Just to give you an idea of what that means, wander a couple of miles from Korchak's mountain to Mount Rushmore, which, incidentally, Korchak helped to carve. And take a look at Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt, and then use your imagination, and you'll see that the four of them will fit quite comfortably under Crazy Horse's arm.
Kresy, gdzie przez parę wieków rezydowała rodzina, mają już dla mnie niestety ten sam urok, co Kenia czy Indie dla mieszkającego w Londynie Anglika.
Dla każdego chyba z nas to jest pytanie zasadnicze. Gdzie jesteśmy? To miejsce pierwszych inicjacji określa nas chyba już na całe życie. W 1982 roku, kiedy tu był stan wojenny, ja przemierzałem akurat Nowy Meksyk, Arizonę i tak dalej. Byłem gdzieś w podróży po Ameryce.
A memorial to World War II is about to put a small Israeli city on the map. Russian President Vladimir Putin is slated to inaugurate the monument in Netanya Monday, commemorating the Red Army's triumph over Nazi Germany. A large number of Red Army veterans, like Shlomo Fishman, live in the coastal city.
French actor Gérard Depardieu has been personally handed his new Russian passport by the country's president, Vladimir Putin.
US actor Steven Seagal has been granted Russian citizenship, the Kremlin says. The 64-year-old has visited Russia regularly, accompanying President Putin to several martial arts events.
L'essentiel dans la vie humaine, c'est d'être soi-même, de ne pas changer pour les autres, de se donner toute la possibilité d'être un être humain, de comprendre les autres, d'écouter, de savoir écouter, savoir réfléchir, savoir ce que c'est que l'art et ce qu'on est, mais sans changer ses principes ni soi-même. L'important, c'est de rester soi-même. Ce qui est très très difficile pour beaucoup de gens. Ils se composent en d'autres personnes, et ces personnes-là ne sont pas aussi intéressantes. Par exemple, mon fils.
Il était une fois un peintre, n'ayant que toile et couleurs, mais il aimait une actrice, celle qui adorait les fleurs. Alors il mit à la vente ses toiles, son humble demeure, et de la sorte acheta.
All right. Now let's see. Cut to interior Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. Tension mounts on Oscar night as two popular young actors prepare to open the next envelope. Anxious audience welcomes Matt Dillon, the star of The Outsiders and Tex, and Christy McNichol, the star of The Rest of the Country.
Tango, the producer is Zubigniew Rybski Sky something.
The envelope.
And the winner is Tango Jibnewski Sky.
Lithuania, June 14, 1940. Not a fallow field, my country. The landscape of its history dotted by mountains of bones, washed by rivers of blood, my country. Railbeds, cattle cars, labor camps. Eyes strolls through the barracks, caressing breathing skeletons with fingers of death. Scurvy, starvation, disease, overwork, blizzards. Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, Kolyma. The iron sun of the north glances off pain. Cones fall on winter's white moss. The clock pendulum counts axe strokes in the transparent air. Guards in fur caps play fate. Someone throws the queen of spades on the table. Wind orchestrates symphonies of skulls rattling on bones. Facts obliterate understanding of one moment, of one single, interminable day.
Good day. For proper digestion, I drink Fosterline. In case of appetite loss, I drink Chardonnay from Barossa Valley. In case of low blood pressure, I drink Johnny Walker. When I had a cold, I drink Polish vodka Chopin with Manuka. Excuse me, do you drink a water? I never been that sick.
back in 1950. I was 15 years old. She was 13 years old.
In 1916, the forces of the crown to take the orange, white and green bombarded Dublin town. But in 21, Britannia's sons were forced to earn their pay. And the black and tans, like lightning, ran from the rifles of the IRA. They burned their way through Munster and laid Leinster on the rack. In Connacht and in Ulster marched the men of brown and black. They shot down wives and children in their own heroic way. And the black and tans, like lightning, ran from the rifles of the IRA.
What's the buttons?
Oh no, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this.
Voice recognition technology? In a lift? In Scotland? You ever tried voice recognition technology?
No.
They don't do Scottish accents.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent. 11. 11.
That sounds Irish, not American.
Not, doesn't it? 11.
Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
The sun shines for you, he said. The day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Howth Head in the grey tweed suit and his straw hat. The day I got him to propose to me, yes. First I gave him the bit of seed cake out of my mouth, and it was leap year, like now, yes. 16 years ago. My God, after that long kiss, I near lost my breath, yes. He said I was a flower of the mountain, yes. And that was one true thing he said in his life. And the sun shines for you today, yes. And that was why I liked him. Because I saw he understood or felt who a woman is, and I knew I could always get around him. And I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes.
I remembered that my poet told me that Clonagale should be treated as traitors, and that Roger Casement, who wasn't even shot but hanged, was our real hero.
The war. What's more opposite to music? The silence of ruined cities and killed people. Our children draw swooping rockets, not shooting stars. Over 400 children have been injured and 153 children died, and we'll never see them drawing. Our parents are happy to wake up in the morning in bomb shelters, but alive. Our loved ones don't know if we will be together again. The war doesn't let us choose who survives and who stays in eternal silence. Our musicians wear body armor instead of tuxedo. They sing to the wounded in hospitals, even to those who can't hear them, but the music will break through anyway. We defend our freedom to live, to love, to sound. On our land, we are fighting Russia, which brings horrible silence with its bombs, the dead silence. Feel the silence with your music. Feel it today to tell our story.
Hello, how are you? Welcome. Yeah. Ikanis. Essa galá. Canta.
Oops. Yeah.
So, you know, basically that's it.
Is that
No,
it?
it sounds so weird.
Oui, je t'aime. Moi non plus. Oh, mon amour.
After Lot and his family left Abraham and went to the city of Sodom, they found how wicked the people were, and Lot grieved at their wickedness. The Lord knew of this and sent 2 angels down to visit the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The angels came to the gates of Sodom in the evening, and they looked as ordinary travelers looked. Lot saw them and offered them food to eat and a place to sleep in his house. When they came to his house, he made them a feast. But before they could lie down to sleep, the men of Sodom, old and young, to the last man, surrounded the house. Then they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them." Lot went out to the men and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But the men said, "Stand back." And they pressed against Lot and smote him and tried to break down the door. But the 2 angels in the house seized Lot and brought him in with them and shut the door. And they struck blind the men who were outside. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest they be consumed in the punishment of the city. For the Lord has sent us to destroy this place." The angels took Lot and his family from the city and said, "Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed." But Lot feared they would not be strong enough to get to the hills in time and asked to be allowed to go to a little city not far away. This the angels granted him, for he was a good man in the sight of the Lord. Even as Lot came to the little city of Zoar, the Lord rained fire and brimstone upon Sodom and its sister city Gomorrah, and all that was in the cities, the people, the houses, and things that grew from the ground were destroyed. But Lot's wife was behind him as he went into Zoar, and she turned for a backward look at what had been her home. And lo, because she had not heeded the angels, her body was turned into a pillar of salt.
Fumemba is a story about life, love, and death.
The movie is dedicated to East Chicago, Indiana-born Olave Egley Udvalke, whose The Mirror and the Void was read at International Book Fair, Frankfurt, Germany in 2002. She worked for 20 years as a correspondent of Radio Free Europe, covering the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the rebirth of the Baltic states. Her autobiography, Sugar Mountain, became a literary event.
1939, and the Allies turned away. From the underground rose a hope of freedom as a whisper. City in despair, but they never lost their faith. Women, men, and children fight, they were dying side by side. And the blood they shed upon the streets was a sacrifice willingly paid. Warsaw, city at war, voices from underground, whispers of freedom. 1944, help that never came. Calling Warsaw, city at war, voices from underground, whispers of freedom. Rise up and hear the call, history calling to you. In accordance with the old traditions. 1944, still the Allies turned away. Fighting street to street in a time of hope and desperation. Did it on their own, and they never lost their faith. Women, men, and children fight, they were dying side by side. And the blood they shed upon the streets was a sacrifice willingly paid. Warsaw, city at war, voices from underground, whispers of freedom. 1944, help that never came. Calling Warsaw, city at war, voices from underground, whispers of freedom. Rise up and hear the call, history calling to you. Warszawa!
Ηθάκη. Θα βγεις στον πύργαμο για την Ηθάκη. Να χέσαι να είναι μικρός ο δρόμος, γεμάτος περιπέτειες, γεμάτος γνωσής. Τους λεαστριγόνας και τους κύκλωμας, τον θυμωμένο Ποσειδώνα με φοβάσαι. Τέτοιος τον δρόμο μου πάτε σου δεν θα βρεις, αν μεν η σκέψης σου υψηλή, αν εκλεκτή, συγκίνησης το πνεύμα και το σώμα του αγίζει. Τους λεστριγόνας και τους κύκλοπας, τον Άγιο Ποσειδώνα δεν θα συναντήσεις, αν δεν τους κουβαίνεις με την ψυχή σου, αν την ψυχή σου δεν τους στείνει εμπρός σου. Να ευχέσαι να είναι μικρός ο δρόμος, πολλά καλοκαίρινα πρωί να είναι, μου τη ευχαριστήσει με τη χαρά. Θα σπαίνεις σε λυπμένη προτιδωμένος, θα σταματήσεις ο εμπρόια φινικία και τις καλές πραγμάτες αν προκοιτήσεις. Συντέφια και καφάλα και αρχικομπάρια και ευαίνους και ειδονικά μοριαδικά και κάθε λόγης όδο μπορείς με αυθόνα ειδονικά μοριδικά.
Labas vakaras. Šiandien laidoje jūs laukia pasakojimas apie išeivijos poetę, rašytoją, visuomeninę veikėją Eglę Juodvalkę, kuri savo darbais visą gyvenimą liudijo meilę Lietuvai, tėvynei, kuri buvo iš jos atimta.
Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. He sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. He sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
I saw the lion the night I passed by the window. I saw the flickering shadows of love of her blind.
Ramses the Great ruled in the 13th century BC, and by this point the Egyptians had been cutting stone for 1,500 years, and they had it down to an absolute science. But if there was ever a question that science could become art, that is the answer.
Ruling for nearly 7 decades, Ramses II was the pharaoh of pharaohs. His status as Egypt's golden boy made him the country's most eligible bachelor and husband. He had at least 21 children by the age of 21, and at least 17 wives. Over the course of his life, he would father as many as 110 sons and probably as many daughters.
Why so many children? Well, that is part of his virility. The pharaoh was considered the bull, and a bull is kind of a primal symbol of male sexuality.
ranka glostai papurusius plaukus jauniausios dukters. Ji prie tavęs. Tu jau toli. Akys skrodžia tvyrančią tamsą. Dešinėje rankoje žodis, kairėje kaukolė, veidrodėje tuštuma.
Harking back, when in the dumps, I faced Gog and Magog. And the only weaponry I found was image and metaphor. That's the weaponry of Fumemba.
Just up the road from Llanfair Pwllgwyngyll go Gerech Windrobwll, Llantysilio go. The temperature got to 21 Celsius, that's 70 in Fahrenheit.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Quel pays effleura la belle romaine, Archibia d'Anétaï, qui fut sa cousine germaine, et qu'au parlant qu'embryon mène, de sur rivière ou sur étang, qui beauté eut trop plus qu'humaine, mais où sont les neiges d'antan? Qui beauté eut trop plus qu'humaine, mais où sont les neiges d'antan? Où est la très sage Héloïse, pour qui châtré fut et puis moine, Pierresse Bayard à Saint-Denis, pour son amour cette Essoine.
Play La Marseillaise. Play it.
Years ago, when I was younger, I kinda liked a girl I knew.
Przepraszam, jestem Zakopanego. Przepraszam.
Cały świat. Na razie jest siedlisko, ale będzie San Francisco, a tam gdzie krętowisko, będzie stąd mój bank.
Do you plan to go to Sweden to receive the award?
I'm sorry that I will not be able to go to Sweden.
D-Day, the Normandy invasion, the turning point in World War II. But all the sacrifice and promise of D-Day would only lead to bitter disappointment in one occupied country, in one war-torn city, a city caught between the Nazis and global politics and Allied tension.
So you had the striking force, and then there were followers who were waiting for you to be shot, wounded or killed, so they could pick up your weapon and go ahead. 10, 12-year-olds would crawl up and blow up a tank or set it on fire with a gasoline bottle. And this is all your neighborhood. Imagine that. Your neighborhood turning to rubble. And you still refuse to give up. And you look at the sky and you say to yourself, oh, the Americans are coming.
They not only watched the Nazis massacre the insurgents and kill a lot of the civilian population, but they prevented for many weeks us, the Americans and the Brits, from delivering help to the insurgents.
Some of them shot, others shipped to the Gulag. Then KVD was staging Nazi-like hunts, chasing the underground in all the provinces the Soviets were taking over.
Meadow is summery warm, the stag in the forest runs free, but gather together to greet the storm. Tomorrow belongs to me. The branch of the linden is leafy and green. The Rhine gives its goat to the sea. But somewhere a glory awaits unseen. Tomorrow belongs to me. The babe in his cradle is closing his eyes. The blossom embraces.
The 5 Seasons of a Writer. I thought about death. This was a subject I liked. It had been my favorite for years. In fact, I had been considering it for as long as I could remember. And my memory was like a vast ocean. I didn't need to close my eyes to see many people, their faces and colorful clothes, to recall their speech and gestures. I studied my past. And my past was like the water of the sea. Close to the shore, it was luminous and transparent. Farther on, it became dark and murky, and far, far away, it was pitch black and teeming with invisible forms of demons and ghosts waiting for my arrival. I tried to count the books I had read during my long life. I knew that this pursuit was futile, hopeless, even ludicrous. Nevertheless, I tried. Books made me happy. I would buy several at a time and take them home. Volumes would lie scattered on tables in every room, and I would delve into them, eager to disperse the haze that hid unknown continents, cities, rivers, and people. When I decided to be a writer, I knew that I must be aware of all these distant voices of the past. I would be the bearer of a tradition that could not be acquired in a flash. I knew what a long way stretching ahead of me, but I felt no fear. Did these voices not promise to take me to the magic land? The world of books captivated me like the first days of spring. It swept over me in the brisk, allegro tempo of youth, when Huckleberry Finn first ran away from home, I too succumbed to the excitement of the gentle breezes and murmurs of the Mississippi River. Twain's barefoot ragamuffin was replaced by Rob Roy climbing steep paths in the heather, and later by the knight of the woeful countenance who dared joust with windmills. And then I discovered Joseph Conrad, who took me to the open seas and showed me the world. From Conrad I learned that every man is responsible for his own conduct, and though he dies, his deeds accompany him to the end. I realized then that the whole world rests on a very few old and simple ideas, that failures become irrelevant in the face of courageous struggle in a world without morals and without hope. I still remember my father's body on the bed, my mother crying, the doctor murmuring in a low voice. The transformation of my living father into a small photograph that stood ever since on the table has been physical pain from which the young heart had never recovered. All the events of the past years had hardened permanently like plaster into a museum piece that could not be altered, only looked at like primavera. It was a collage of broken images. Yes, spring is often the cruelest season, but youth is brash enough to pay it no mind. Each spring, like youth, seems eternal until the next season is upon us, with scarcely any warning. After my father's death, books never again took me into the magic world as they had. I didn't stop loving them, but they were already announcing the approach of summer. I hadn't as yet thought seriously about my own writing. How could I? I was reading the masters, men who did not try to comfort their readers or themselves, relentless men of honor and integrity. When I finished my first short story, I made a note in my diary. It is necessary to live and write as though the world were pure, and to compel the reader to believe that it is possible to live that way. Like the shepherd boy in the summer concerto sonnet, I enjoyed myself but could not conquer the fear that a storm would one day destroy everything I was trying to build. I stopped reading poetry, and novels were replaced by history books. When I was in Turkey, the desk in my study was covered with maps and books about Suleiman the Magnificent and the Ottoman Empire. What a pleasure it was to look at the sketches of the Ottoman domains at the time of Napoleon drawn by Luigi Mayer, to read the Venetian surgeon Niccolò Barbaro's account of the fall of Constantinople in 1453. On my journeys, I brought with me the image of each city as it had been in ancient times, swarming with noisy merchants of lemons, olives, and wine. What joy I felt walking along colonnaded avenues in the theater baths of Aphrodisias and seeing the temple of Hadrian and Ephesus with the inscription above the architrave that it had been built by Quintillus in the honor of the deified emperor. Another hot summer, this time in Mexico. Walking along the avenues of death from the pyramid of the sun to the pyramid of the moon, I pondered my fate. What will remain of me after my death? A page I have written, or an anecdote I once told. At first glance, little seemed changed. I still traveled, maybe even more often with my wife, but the character of the trips altered. I tried to find a way to express my feelings in my writing, but failed. I woke at the first light when the hunters of Vivaldi's Autumn Concerto were setting off for the chase, because it was the best time for me to write. But instead of writing, I sat for hours, watching the mountains from the windows of the veranda. One Sunday, when it was time for breakfast, there was no movement in the kitchen. Several times I checked my watch. I became uneasy. Finally, I left the porch and found my wife lying like a rag doll on the bathroom floor. Autumn turned to winter. The days had no beginning and no end. I started to drink. Occasionally, I forgot to turn on the heating. I came to my senses, my teeth chattering out from the cold. The outside world was covered by snow. Icicles hung from the roof. I could not work at all. Each object at home chafed the wound. I knew that something had to be done. I grew haggard and pale as I wandered from room to room. I came to the conclusion that I would have to leave in order to survive. I would have to move somewhere else, far away from my own country and the people I knew. The flight to Auckland in New Zealand was long and exhausting. The old instinct of the traveler helped kindle the spark of life still smoldering in my subconscious. I rented a small house in Takapuna on the other side of the Stanley Bay. Here I was a perfect stranger. Vivaldi's shimmering little trills brought no comfort. During the day I went to Auckland by boat and spent hours in the public library at Lawrence Street, going through annals of old newspapers. This aimless activity brought me back to life. I stopped drinking. Once, sitting on a bench in Albert Park, I read a story of Maui, who tried to deceive the sleeping Lady Death and make humans immortal, disguised by a caterpillar. Maui wanted to crawl through her womb and out of her mouth to overcome her strength once and for all. But the little bird, Piwakawaka, woke her with his twittering, and she crushed Maui between her thighs. For the first time since the death of my wife, I smiled. At home, I thought about my freedom to live and write. If I abandoned this freedom, I would be lost. I started an essay explaining why doomed Hector turned and ran when he faced Achilles. Through the epic heroes, I tried to understand my own fate. Why don't readers of this ancient story condemn Hector, I asked. Why do they continue to respect him? I worked several weeks finding a question, but not the answer. Was it not true that every person was a coward once? That evening I stopped writing and decided to return to Europe. My arrival went unnoticed, and I liked it that way.
Thomas Stearns Eliot, The Wasteland, read by Agle Jodvelke. The Burial of the Dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnberger See with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar keine Russin, stamm aus Litauen, echt Deutsch. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousin's, he took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, "Marie, Marie, hold on tight." And down we went. In the mountains, there you feel free.